Alright, quick hello? This is an original Tales first story, and I won't over-explain. Let's start.
We'll pay you nothing, my mom said to my 14-year-old. You really thought you'd get money? How pathetic. My sister laughed in her face. After making her work at their restaurant for weeks, promising a salary, I didn't shout. I did this. The next morning, they called me in a panic. But to understand why that panic tasted so sweet, so terrifyingly necessary, you have to understand the silence that came before it. When I opened the front door that afternoon, I expected the usual symphony of a lived-in home. You know the sound, don't you? It's the chaotic, beautiful friction of life happening. I expected the thud of a backpack hitting the floorboards, the aggressive crinkle of a foil chip bag being torn open with the voracious appetite of a teenager, or perhaps the tinny, a high-pitched laughter of a YouTuber bleeding out from a smartphone speaker. I expected the soundtrack of a 14-year-old girl existing in her own space. Instead, I walked into a tomb. It wasn't a peaceful silence. It wasn't the kind of quiet you find in a library or a church. The kind that invites you to rest your weary mind. No, this was a heavy, pressurized silence, the kind that pushes against your eardrums and makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up in primal alarm. It was the silence of a held breath, of a scream swallowed whole. I stood there in the entryway, my keys still clutched in my hand, the metal biting into my palm, my body freezing before my brain could even process why. The afternoon light was filtering through the sheer curtains, casting long dusty beams across the floor, but the air felt stagnant, like as if time itself had decided to stop and stare at the tragedy unfolding in my living room. Molly was sitting on the beige couch, her favorite spot, but she looked like a stranger inhabiting my daughter's body. She was facing the wall, just staring at the plaster as if it were a cinema screen showing the saddest movie ever made. She wasn't scrolling through TikTok. She wasn't half watching a sitcom. She wasn't even pretending to have a textbook open on her lap. Her phone, which usually felt like a surgical extension of her right hand, a permanent prosthetic of the digital age, was nowhere to be seen. It was the absence of that device that frightened me more than anything. For a teenager to abandon their lifeline to the outside world, something catastrophic must have occurred. Her shoulders, usually relaxed or hunched over a screen, were pulled up high and tight toward her ears, rigid with a tension that looked painful. She looked like she was trying to hold her physical form together, using nothing but pure, brittle willpower, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped and was desperately trying not to let the cracks show. I moved into the room, my footsteps sounding impossibly loud on the hardwood, feeling like an intruder in my own grief. When I finally saw her face, my heart didn't just break. It evaporated. Her eyes were swollen, the delicate skin around them puffed and red, not with the fresh, wet tears of a sudden injury, but with the dry, raw exhaustion of someone who has been crying for hours until the well has run dry. It wasn't theatrical, it wasn't a tantrum, it was the look of someone who has been used. I set my bag down on the coffee table, moving with the exaggerated slowness one uses when approaching a startled animal, afraid that any sudden movement might scare the truth back into the shadows. "Hey," I said, and my voice sounded thin, stretching across the distance between us like a fragile thread. "Honey, what's going on?" Molly blinked. It was a slow, heavy blink, as if her eyelids were weighted with lead, as if she had forgotten momentarily that she was required to function in a world populated by other people. She looked at me, and for a split second, I saw a flash of pure shame. Not hers, but shame placed upon her, before she did what children often do when they are trying to protect their parents from a monster they don't know how to name. "Nothing," she said. It was too quick, too flat. It was a line read from a script she didn't understand, handed to her by a director she feared. It was the defensive reflex of a wounded creature, trying to hide the injury so it won't be culled from the herd. I didn't push. Not yet. I knew that pressure now would only make the walls go up higher. Instead, I sat beside her, close enough to offer warmth, but with enough distance that she didn't feel trapped. I let the silence settle again, but this time I filled it with presence. "Okay," I whispered, watching her profile, the way a single tear track had dried on her cheek like a scar. "I'm right here. We can sit here as long as you need. Take your time." She tried. I watched her struggle, the muscles in her jaw bunching as she clenched her teeth, her breathing becoming thin and reedy as she fought to keep the dam from breaking. Her eyes shone again, fresh tears pooling along the lower lashes, in trembling there like heavy raindrops on a wire. Then the dam shattered. Her face crumpled, losing all its forced composure, collapsing into a mask of pure anguish, and the words spilled out in a rush, wet and jagged. They're not going to pay me." The sentence hung in the air, foreign and grotesque. It hit me wrong. Not because I didn't understand the English language, but because my brain, conditioned by years of logic and decency, refused to believe that those specific words could be arranged in that specific order and still be true. "Not pay you," I repeated, testing the phrase on my tongue, hoping I had misheard, hoping that perhaps she meant they were having banking issues, or the payroll software was down. "What do you mean, not pay you?" Molly swallowed hard, her gaze fixed on her own hands, which were twisting together in her lap, knuckles white. "Grandma," she choked out, her voice cracking mid-word. "And Aunt Belle." My stomach dropped. It wasn't a gentle descent. It was the sensation of an elevator cable snapping, plummeting me into the dark basement of realization. It wasn't in the "I didn't know you were working there" way. I knew. Of course I knew. It had been the defining feature of the first month of her summer break. The schedule pinned to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a slice of pizza. The early mornings where she would drag herself out of bed, eyes bleary but determined. The late nights where she would come home smelling of stale fryer grease and industrial cleaner, her feet aching, but carrying a proud little "I've got this, Mom" energy that made my chest swell. She was growing up. She was learning the value of $1. She was participating in the family legacy. But "they're not going to pay me" didn't fit into the reality I thought we lived in. Not with family. Not with a child. Not after I had watched her sacrifice her summer freedom for their benefit. "They're just late," I said automatically, the excuse tumbling out of my mouth before I could stop it. It was a reflex, a habit ingrained in me since childhood. Defend the family, smooth over the cracks, pretend the jagged edges aren't sharp. "Right." "They said later?" Molly's head shook, a small, hopeless movement. She took a shuddering breath, looking like she had rehearsed this conversation in her head 1,000 times on the bus ride home, trying to find a version where it didn't hurt as much. "No," she whispered. "I asked last week, and they said later. And then I asked again, and they said later. And then today I asked again. Today was payday," I said. The words meant more for myself than for her. "End of the month." That was the agreement. Molly nodded, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her nose. "I went to them after my shift," she continued, her voice gaining a little strength from the memory of the injustice. I asked if they had time, like if they could pay me now because the month is over." She said it with the tone of someone who had tried very, very hard to be professional. I could see her standing there, in that chaotic kitchen, hands clasped, trying to be polite, trying not to be a nuisance, just asking for what was hers. And then, Molly's mouth tightened, her chin trembling. Grandma laughed. I felt something inside my chest go cold. Absolute zero. She laughed, Molly repeated, staring at the rug as if the pattern held the answers to why people could be so cruel. Like it was funny, and she said, "We'll pay you nothing." My throat constricted so fast it felt like a hand was squeezing my windpipe. My body was reacting before my mind could catch up, flooding my veins with adrenaline, preparing me to fight a predator that was threatening my young. "And Belle?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Belle was never far from Mom's shadow, never one to miss an opportunity to punch down. "Belle was there," Molly added, her voice barely audible now. "And she said, you really thought we'd pay you? How pathetic." The words landed like physical slaps. I actually flinched. And not just because they were cruel. Cruelty I could handle. Cruelty I was used to. But because they were casual. That was the horror of it. It sounded like it had been fun for them. Like Molly's hope, her diligence, her weeks of scrubbing floors and chopping vegetables had been a running joke they were just waiting to deliver the punchline to. Molly stared at her hands again, picking at a hangnail until it bled. "They said I was family," she whispered, the indoctrination echoing in her voice. "That I was just helping. That family helps family. But you worked there full-time for a month," I said, my voice steady but rising in intensity. "Yes, I know, but she said that family doesn't get paid for helping." Her voice wobbled, threatening to collapse again. The humiliation was eating her alive, digesting her self-worth right in front of me. "And then," she said, quieter than I had ever heard her speak, "they said my work wasn't even good." That part, that was the dagger. That was the twist of the knife. Not the money. Money can be replaced. Not even the theft of her time, but the dismantling of her pride. The way they took something she had been building, her sense of competence, her first foray into the adult world, and smashed it, making it feel embarrassing. They didn't just rob her wallet. They robbed her of the feeling that she was capable. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, a rhythmic thudding that sounded like war drums. I could feel my hands curling into fists, wanting to do something violent. Slam a table, throw a plate against the wall, call someone and scream until my voice gave out. But I looked at Molly. She was fragile right now. She had already been laughed at by the people who were supposed to protect her. She didn't need to see her mother explode. She didn't need more chaos. She needed a rock. She needed an anchor in this storm of gaslighting. So I forced my voice to stay steady, ironing out the rage until it was flat and cold. "Did they say anything else?" Molly hesitated, biting her lip. She looked like she didn't want to repeat the final insult, fearing that saying it aloud would make it true all over again. "They said we didn't have a written contract," she said, looking up at me with wide, fearful eyes. Like that meant I was stupid for thinking they'd pay me. Like it was my fault for trusting them. My mouth went dry. There are moments in life when the veil drops. When you learn something about the people who raised you that you wish you could unlearn. It's like finding out a cherished childhood photo is actually a fake backdrop. It's like realizing a familiar, comforting voice is capable of saying things you thought only villains in movies said. It rearranges your DNA. It rewrites your history. I stood up. I didn't rush. I picked up my phone from the table where I'd left it. "Okay," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "I'm going to call Grandma." Molly's eyes snapped up, panic flaring in her irises. "Mom, don't—" "I'm not yelling," I promised, and I meant it. Yelling is for people who have lost control. I had never been more in control in my life. I just need to hear it from her. I need to know exactly what the position is. I hit the call button. The speaker was on. It rang twice. At that familiar chirpy ringtone that used to mean Sunday dinners and birthday checks. Now it sounded like a warning siren. Mom answered on the second ring, her voice light, airy, completely unbothered. It was the voice of a woman who had not just committed a moral crime. "Hello, Tessa," she chirped. "Hello, Mom," I said carefully, staring at the wall, visualizing the conversation as a chess match. "Molly is home. She's upset. She says you told her you won't pay her for the last month of work." A pause. a tiny, almost amused silence on the other end. I could hear the clatter of silverware in the background, the hum of the restaurant. "Oh," Mom said, her tone shifting slightly, becoming dismissive. "She told you." My stomach turned over. "So, it's true," I said. "You're not paying her." "Yes," Mom replied, as if she were discussing a change in the lunch menu or the weather forecast. "We're not paying her." I stared at the wall across from me, the same blank space Molly had been studying. And suddenly, I understood why she looked so hollowed out. It wasn't just the money. It was the absolute lack of remorse. "But you promised her," I said, my voice tightening despite my best efforts. "You told her she'd be paid. You gave her a rate, $14 an hour." Mom made a sound, something between a scoff and a laugh, a wet, ugly noise. "That was obviously a joke, Tessa. Come on. She's family." She was helping out her aunt and her grandmother. "She was working," I corrected, enunciating every syllable. "She worked full shifts. She closed the kitchen. She scrubbed the floors for weeks. And she got experience," Mom replied, her voice rising, defensive now. "She learned how a business works. She should be grateful we even let her behind the counter. Most places wouldn't hire a 14-year-old. I felt Molly shift beside me on the couch, shrinking away from the phone as if the words were physical blows raining down on her. "And honestly," Mom added, delivering the blow with the casual cruelty of someone who has never been told no in her entire life, "her work wasn't even that good. She was slow. She complained. If we were paying for that kind of service, we wouldn't have hired her in the first place." I didn't speak for a second. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the anger had reached a critical mass where words felt too small, too insufficient to contain the magnitude of the betrayal. Then Mom delivered the final little knife, twisting it with pride. "Besides, we didn't have a contract," she said smugly. "So, what exactly do you think you can do about it?" Molly made a sound. It wasn't quite a sob, and it wasn't quite a breath. It was the sound of a heart breaking in real time. That sound did something to me. It didn't make me louder. It made me still. It crystallized the world into absolute clarity. "I see," I said. "Thank you for clarifying." I ended the call. I turned to Molly. Her face was blotchy, a map of misery. Her eyes were wide, swimming in tears. She looked like she wanted to disappear into the couch cushions and dissolve into dust. I pulled her into me, wrapping my arms around her shaking frame. She cried then. Not the dramatic wailing crying of a toddler, but the deep racking sobs of a person whose reality has just been shattered. The kind where you try to stop, but you can't, because your body is leaking the shock out of you. I held her tight, rocking her slightly. "I'm so sorry," I whispered into her hair, which smelled of the cheap shampoo she liked and the faint lingering scent of restaurant grease. "I'm so sorry they did that to you." Molly sniffed, pulling back slightly to look at me. I thought I did something wrong." "No," I said, firm and fierce. "You did your job. You did exactly what you were supposed to do. You showed up. You worked hard. They did something wrong." She hiccuped, wiping her nose on her sleeve. "They laughed at me," she whispered, the memory haunting her. "I know," I said. "I know. And you didn't deserve that. Not for 1 second." I didn't shout. I didn't call them back to scream. I didn't pace the room like a storm. And I kept my voice steady because Molly needed steady. But inside me, something had clicked into place. A gear that had been rusted shut for decades suddenly turned. Soon, I would do something that would make them regret everything. And the next morning, my mom would call me in a panic. People like to imagine situations like this come out of nowhere. They like to think a normal, loving family just suddenly wakes up one day and decides, as a fun group activity, to steal from a child. But when I looked back, really looked back through the lens of history, it didn't feel random. It felt inevitable. It felt like the final scene in a story that had been playing out since I was small. I was 3 years younger than my sister Belle. That might not sound like much of a gap, but in my house it was the distance between the sun and a distant, a frozen planet. Belle was the sun. She was the gravitational center of our universe. And me? I was furniture. Decorative, useful, quiet, easily moved aside when the plot required it. When we were kids, Belle would pick an interest, and the entire household would rearrange itself around it like it was a royal decree. If Belle wanted to dance, suddenly we were a dance family. Mom would buy the tool, Dad would drive the car, and I would sit in the waiting room doing homework. If Belle wanted to play soccer, we spent weekends in the rain cheering. Mom and Dad threw themselves into her pursuits with the manic energy of people launching a rocket into space. They paid for private lessons, bought the top-tier equipment, sat in the front row, and clapped like she had just cured a rare disease. And me? I clapped too. That was my role. I was the supporting cast, the extra in the movie of Belle's life. I was the one who smiled in the background of the photos. The one who did the chores because Belle is too busy with practice. She has practice, Mom would say, waving a hand as if practice was a serious medical condition that required convalescence. Just help out, Tessa. Your sister has so much on her plate. Your sister is under a lot of pressure, Dad would add, as if the plate was full of diamonds and not just teenage whims. So I helped out. I washed the dishes. I folded the laundry. I took care of the little things so Belle could keep being important. And here's the part that messes with your head. They weren't always cruel about it. They didn't beat me. They didn't starve me. They just treated Belle like her life mattered more. Felt like her dreams were the family's oxygen, and mine were just carbon dioxide, a byproduct of breathing. By the time we were adults, the dynamic didn't disappear. It matured. It aged like a fine wine, if the wine was made of favoritism and tasted like resentment. Belle married young, to a man Mom adored because he nodded a lot, and she had 2 kids, Mason and Harper. They were treated like tiny celebrities. Mom and Dad worried about their futures, set up savings accounts, spoke about them with a soft, glowing pride that made their faces look younger. Meanwhile, when Molly came along, the conversation shifted. It wasn't mean exactly, it was instructional. Molly needs to learn work ethic, Mom would say, peering at my toddler as if she suspected her of being born lazy. It's good for her to struggle a little, Dad would say. You builds character? Love was poured on Belle's kids like a waterfall. Love was rationed for Molly, like water in a drought. Approval was conditional. Lectures were free. Then a few years ago, Belle decided her dream, her destiny she called it, was to own a restaurant. It wasn't, I've always wanted this. It wasn't, I've gone to culinary school. It was more like she woke up on a Tuesday and announced it. And Mom and Dad acted like this had been written in the stars. This is Belle's dream, Mom said, misty-eyed, clutching her chest. She's always wanted this. We have to support her, Dad agreed, opening his checkbook. They threw themselves into that restaurant the way they threw themselves into everything Belle did. Except this time there was real money involved. Serious money. Retirement money. I didn't know the details, but I knew the pressure. Over the last year, it got worse. They started pushing me to support the dream, which in my family is code for give Belle something. Money, time, labor, silence. You should invest, Mom would say, breezy and manipulative. It's a sure thing. It's family, Dad would add, looking disappointed in my hesitation. I told them no. Not because I didn't love my family, and not because I wanted them to fail, but because I have a daughter. I have bills. I have a college fund that matters more to me than Belle's newest identity crisis. Also, and this is important, I didn't want to be exploited. I had been the helper my whole life. I was done. They didn't like that. The temperature at family gatherings dropped. The conversations got sharper. Every refusal became evidence of my selfishness. They wanted free labor. I, too. Just come help on weekends, Mom would say. It's a startup. We're all pitching in. I went once. Just once. I stood there and watched the chaos. I watched the way Mom and Belle spoke to the staff like they were disposable parts of a machine. I watched Belle comp meals for her friends while the dishwasher looked ready to pass out. I thought, I am not becoming part of this. So I stopped going. And then one day, Molly came home, glowing. Actually glowing. I got a job, she announced, dropping her backpack. What kind of job? I asked, looking up from my laptop. At the restaurant, she said, excited. Aunt Belle and Grandma offered. They said they need help for the summer rush. They said they'll pay me $14 an hour. $14 an hour. To a 14-year-old, that sounded like a fortune. Like it sounded respectable. It sounded like the kind of thing adults say when they are treating a teenager's labor seriously. Molly was proud. She wanted to earn money for a trip she'd been planning, a band trip tied to her 15th birthday. She didn't want to ask me for the money. She wanted to earn it. She wanted to feel grown. I had a bad feeling. A knot formed in my stomach the moment she said it. I knew my family. I knew their history with boundaries. But I looked at her hopeful face, and I couldn't imagine. I simply could not conceive that they would do to Molly what they had done to me, but worse. I couldn't imagine they would cross the line from favoritism into theft. So I let her go. And now we were back in the present, where Molly sat staring at the wall, and that line hadn't just been crossed. It had been erased. Is that night, after Molly finally went to bed, the house went quiet in the way houses do when they are holding grief. The lights were off. The dishwasher hummed its rhythmic cycle, but the air felt heavy. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the grain of the wood, replaying Mom's voice in my head. We'll pay you nothing. As if my child's labor was a joke. As if humiliation was a valid teaching tool. I didn't feel dramatic. I didn't feel like weeping. I felt focused. Coldly, sharply focused. This didn't get to end as a lesson in being exploited. That was my lesson, growing up. It would not be Molly's. I was still sitting there, nursing a cold cup of tea, when I heard soft footsteps on the hallway floor. Molly appeared in the doorway, clutching her phone like it was a fragile bird. Her eyes were red, puffy slits. I can't sleep, she whispered, her voice trembling. I patted the chair next to me. Come here. She came over, sat down, and unlocked her phone with shaky fingers. The blue light illuminated her tear-stained face. I want to show you, she said. She started scrolling. It was a digital paper trail of her exploitation, message after message, shift reminders. Come in at 3. Can you stay late? Belle needs help with prep. We need you today, don't be late. It wasn't vague. It wasn't, help out if you can. It was scheduling. Strict, demanding scheduling. Then she stopped scrolling. There, she said, pointing to a message from Grandma, dated 4 weeks ago. It read, start date is Monday, $14 per hour. We'll pay you at the end of the month. Don't be late. And underneath it, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the witch's oven, were the other messages. When do I get paid? Molly had asked a week ago. Later, busy right now. Is the check ready? End of the month, Molly. Be patient. Molly swallowed hard, the light of the screen reflecting in her wet eyes. And then, she said quietly, when I asked again today, they laughed. I took a slow breath, calculating. 4 weeks of full-time shifts, even with breaks, that was roughly 160 hours. At $14 an hour, that was $2,240 owed. It wasn't pocket change, it was a mortgage payment. It was a used car. It was Molly's time, Molly's sweat, Molly's pride, quantified. I looked at her. Is it okay if I use your phone to document everything? I asked. Molly nodded immediately. Yes, she said. I want it to be real. Not just them saying I'm lying. That broke my heart a second time. The fear that the adults would gaslight her reality away. I hugged her just for a moment, pressing her head against my shoulder. Then I guided her back toward her room. Try to sleep, I said. I'm right here. Nothing is going to hurt you tonight. I waited until she finally fell asleep. Her face turned to the wall, lashes still stuck together from crying. Then I went back to the kitchen. I didn't make tea. I opened my laptop. I didn't search for a lawyer. I didn't look for a police number. I pulled up the State Labor Department wage claim portal. It was a boring gray website, bureaucratic, official, dry. It was the place where you tell the truth in little boxes and hit submit. Molly's phone was next to me, unlocked with her permission. I didn't need to dig. And the proof was lined up like they had prepared it for court themselves. I took screenshots. The offer of pay, the schedule, the denial. The form asked for the worker's name. I typed Molly and her last name. My hands didn't shake. That felt new. Usually when confronting my mother, I shook. Tonight, I was granite. Age, 14. Employer, address, phone number. There was a box that said, describe what happened. I kept it clean. No emotion. No, my mother is a narcissist. Just facts. Worked 4 weeks. Pay promised at $14 per hour. Payment delayed repeatedly. Payment refused on. Employer stated, pay you nothing. Then I attached the screenshots, the clearest ones, the undeniable ones. I stared at the submit button. It was just a gray rectangle on a screen, but it felt like the trigger of a cannon. If I clicked this, and I wasn't just asking for money, I was breaking the code. I was violating the sacred unspoken rule of my family. What happens in the family stays in the family. Belle is the sun. You are the furniture. Asterisk, I didn't make a face. I didn't whisper a prayer. I didn't talk myself out of it. I clicked. A confirmation number popped up with a timestamp. Claim received. I took a screenshot of the confirmation. I closed the laptop. I stood there for a second in the quiet kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. My mom loves family values. She talks about them constantly. Well, so do I. That's why I chose my kid. I stared at the screenshot on my phone for a moment. Then I did something I almost never do. I sent one message to my mom. Short, controlled. No argument, no threats. Claim filed, documentation submitted. Molly will be paid. Then I went to bed. I didn't sleep much. I drifted in and out of a shallow, anxious doze, filled with dreams of shouting that made no sound. I slept just enough to be woken by my phone ringing like it had a job to do. It was 7 a.m. Mom's name lit up the screen. I answered. Her voice had changed overnight. The smugness was gone. The casual cruelty was gone. It was replaced by something sharp and jagged. Tessa, she said, and she sounded like she'd swallowed a shard of glass. Did you file that claim? Yes, I said. A beat of silence, then a breath that came out too hard, a ragged exhale. Why would you do that? She snapped. I could hear the strain. She was trying to hold it together, but the cracks were showing. She wasn't calling to understand. She was calling to undo. You need to withdraw it, she said. Right now. Molly needs to be paid, I replied. Mom made a small offended sound, like I had just suggested we start eating dinner on the roof. This is family, she said, her voice tight, vibrating with that specific frequency of maternal guilt tripping she had perfected over decades. You don't do this to family. You don't report family to the government. I let that sit for half a second. I let the hypocrisy marinate in the silence between us. Then family shouldn't do this to Molly, I said. Her tone shifted instantly. It went warmer, softer, the way it gets when she realizes the stick isn't working and she needs to reach for the carrot. "Let's handle it privately," she said. "Tessa, honey, come on. We'll talk. We'll sort it out. You don't need to involve outsiders. You don't need the state involved." "You mean I don't need witnesses?" I said, and my voice stayed calm, which I knew was infuriating her. "Tessa," she warned, the edge returning. "No," I said. "Fine," she said. Her voice clipped, professional, cold. "We'll talk later." "I'm not scheduling basic decency," I said. "No." The line went quiet. Not a peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that means she's already planning her next move. The strategic silence of a general looking at a map. And she did plan. The next afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there they were, Mom and Belle, standing on my porch like they had come to collect a debt. Mom was wearing her business owner blazer. Belle was wearing oversized sunglasses and a scowl. They stepped forward, crowding the doorway. I'm acting like my porch belonged to them by divine right. "We need to talk," Mom said, stepping forward. "We already did," I replied, not moving back. "You told Molly you'd pay her nothing." Belle let out a laugh, sharp and incredulous. "You actually filed. I can't believe you. You actually reported us?" Mom's eyes flicked past me, scanning the hallway, checking to see who might be watching or listening. "Lower your voice," she murmured to Belle, then looked at me with that tight, pinched smile she uses when she wants to look reasonable. "People don't need to hear this, Tessa." I smiled once, without a trace of humor. Molly heard it. Mom's smile twitched. She abandoned the charm and went straight to the heavy artillery. "Guilt. How could you file against your own family?" she demanded. "Do you know what the fines are? Do you know what an audit looks like?" Belle crossed her arms, shifting her weight. "Seriously, Tessa, this is embarrassing. You're being dramatic." "It's a family business," Mom pressed, "and Molly is family." "That's exactly the point," I said. "She's family, and you stole from her." "She was helping," Mom shot back, her voice rising. "She was working," I corrected. Belle leaned in, lips curling in a sneer. She begged for the experience. "You're acting like she was in a coal mine. She was chopping vegetables in air conditioning." I stared at her. "She was promised pay." Mom waved her hand like I had brought up something childish, like I was complaining about the color of the napkins. "Don't be dramatic. It was a misunderstanding." Belle chimed in, breezy and cruel. "Also, she wasn't even that good. And we were doing her a favor keeping her around." Mom pounced on that, relieved to have an excuse. "Exactly. If we were paying for that level of work, we wouldn't have hired her." "Stop," I said. It came out quieter than I expected. Not a shout, just a hard, final stop, like a door slamming shut. For a second, both of them blinked. They weren't used to being interrupted. They weren't used to the furniture talking back. Then Mom's face hardened. The mask slipped completely. "If you post anything," she said, her voice low and venomous, "we'll sue you. Slander. Libel. We'll take you to court." Belle's eyes brightened. She liked this part. Threats were her love language. "Say the wrong thing online, and we'll make your life miserable, Tessa. We have lawyers." I nodded once. "Noted." Mom pivoted fast. The threat hadn't made me crumble. So now it was bargaining. "We'll give her something," she said, digging into her purse. "Not the full amount, that's ridiculous for a child, but something, a stipend." Belle rolled her eyes, impatient. "Just take the complaint back today, and we'll transfer like $500. That's plenty for a kid." It was so practiced. It sounded like a special offer. "Act now, and we'll give you 20% of what we owe you." I looked at them, my mother, my sister, standing on my porch, trying to negotiate my child's dignity like it was a used couch at a garage sale. "No," I said. Mom's smile fell apart. Belle's laugh died in her throat. "No, Mom repeated, like the word was in a foreign language. The complaint stays, I said. The proof stays. The boundary stays. You pay her what you owe her. Every cent. Mom stared at me, and for a second I saw it. Real confusion. She honestly couldn't understand why her old rules weren't working, why gravity wasn't obeying her. Belle's face tightened into a mask of pure spite. You're really going to ruin us over this? I held the doorframe steady. You did this, I said. I'm just the paperwork. They stood there for another second, waiting for me to fold, waiting for the old Tessa, the quiet Tessa, to apologize and fix it. I didn't. Mom turned first, stiff with rage. Belle followed, muttering something about ungrateful under her breath. As they walked away down the path, I felt it in my bones. This wasn't over. They wouldn't let it be over. For some reason, I still woke up the next day thinking the worst part was behind us. That was my mistake. I underestimated how far they would go to protect their image. I made coffee, checked my phone out of habit, and saw my mom's name sitting at the top of my notifications. She had tagged me in a post. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The photo was of the restaurant. Bright, polished, respectable lighting. The caption was long enough to be a sermon. I skimmed the first line and felt heat climb my neck. Sad day for our family business. When you try to help family, sometimes it backfires. We offered a learning opportunity to a young relative, and now we are being extorted. She didn't mention wages. She didn't mention promises. She didn't mention laughing. She wrote it like this was a heartbreaking Greek tragedy, where she was the benevolent matriarch, and I was the villain with a clipboard. Then I saw the sentence that was already being copied into the comments. She demanded over $2,000 from her own family for helping out. We are heartbroken. $2,000. That's how she wrote it. Like Molly had walked in, waving a gun and a list of demands. Like it was a robbery, not a paycheck. I scrolled down. The comments were a cesspool. Relatives, friends of Belle, random customers. Entitled kids today. Ungrateful. I would have worked for free. My father would have taught her a lesson. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred. They were publicly shaming a 14-year-old to save face. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Molly stood in the doorway in her socks, hair still messy from sleep, phone in her hand. She didn't look angry. She looked small. Mom, she said, her voice shaking. Did I mess up? I set my phone down like it was made of lava. No, I said. Her eyes flicked between my face and her screen. Grandma posted, she says I begged for experience. People are calling me things in the comments. I pulled out the chair next to me. Come here. She sat, shoulders tight, bracing for punishment. I leaned in so she couldn't miss my face. You worked, I said. You asked to be paid. That is not wrong. That is never wrong. But look at what they're saying. They are trying to make you feel wrong, so they don't have to feel guilty, I said. It's a trick. It's a magic trick for bad people. Molly blinked fast. So, what do we do? I picked up my phone again. I opened the post. I didn't write a speech. I didn't write a poem. I didn't get emotional. I wrote what would survive the daylight. A few lines. A timeline. No adjectives. No insults. Just facts. I attached 2 screenshots. One showing the schedule. Molly, shift 3 to 11. 1 showing the promise. $14 per hour. Pay at end of month. And then the confirmation number of the wage claim. At the end, I wrote 1 line. Molly is 14. Pay your workers. I hit post. Then I put my phone face down and stood up to stir the eggs. Molly watched me like she expected lightning to strike the kitchen. Are you okay? She asked. I'm fine, I said, flipping an egg with aggressive precision. I'm just annoyed. Annoyed? Yes, I said. I hate paperwork. They made me do paperwork. That got a tiny sound out of her. almost a laugh. By afternoon, the tide turned. The messages started coming in. Not public ones, people are cowards in public, but private ones. DMs, texts. Most were supportive, but one stood out. It was from a name I didn't recognize. Hannah. Hi. I worked at the restaurant. Can we talk somewhere? Not online. I stared at it. People don't write like that unless they're scared, I thought. I replied, yes. Where? We met 2 days later at a cafe across town. It was midday, ordinary, full of people typing on laptops and drinking lattes. Hannah arrived looking like she was late to a funeral. Quick steps, tense shoulders, eyes scanning the room. She was young, maybe 20. She sat down, didn't touch her drink, and started with, "Thank you for meeting me." "Of course," I said. "Are you okay?" She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. "Not really." She looked at her hands. "I saw your mom's post, and I saw what you posted." I nodded. "And I saw what people were saying about your daughter," she added, her jaw tightening. It made me sick. I waited. Hannah glanced up, her eyes fierce. "I know it's your family." "Yes," I said. "Unfortunately." She almost smiled. Then she leaned forward and lowered her voice. "The staff, we're filing a complaint. Together." I blinked. "Together?" Hannah nodded. "A group. Current and former. Me, the dishwasher. 2 servers." My stomach flipped. She kept going, speaking quickly now. "Hours get shaved. People get told to stay late. And then it's not on the check. Tips get weird. Belle takes a cut for management fees. Nobody wants to push back because your mom runs that place like a kingdom." I felt my mouth go dry. This wasn't just about Molly. This was a system. Hannah's voice softened. "And I saw how they treated Molly." I looked up fast. "They didn't just not pay her," Hannah said, her voice shaking with anger. "They used her. They gave her the dirtiest jobs. Trash, sticky floors, bathrooms when the line was out the door. And if she looked tired, Belle would laugh and say, 'Welcome to the real world, princess.'" Hannah exhaled. She wasn't allowed to complain. If she asked for a break, they'd act like she was being dramatic. Then Hannah looked straight at me. "Molly's a minor. If you're willing, we want her experience included. With you as her guardian." The cafe suddenly felt too bright. I sat back. "So, you want me to join the class action? Or the group claim?" Hannah nodded. "Yes, we have a lawyer interested, pro bono." I stared at her. "That's a lot." "I know," she said quietly. "But this is bigger than one paycheck." I thought of my mom's face on my porch. Thought of Belle laughing. Thought of Molly asking me if she'd ruined the family. I breathed out. "Okay," I said. "I'll do it." Hannah's shoulders dropped. "Thank you." A week passed. Life looked normal from the outside, but inside we were preparing for war. Then I walked into the dance studio to pick Molly up. I saw them immediately. My mother and Belle. They were standing in the lobby, too close to Molly. They had cornered her near the vending machines. Molly looked pale, her eyes darting around for an exit. I felt something cold slide down my spine. I crossed the room in 3 strides. Mom turned first. Her face had that righteous shine it gets when she thinks she's saving a soul. "There you are," she said, like I'd kept her waiting. Belle crossed her arms. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Molly's gaze snapped to me, relief flooding her face. Mom spoke directly to Molly, ignoring me, and her voice sweet and poisonous. "This didn't have to happen, honey. We're family. You don't hurt family." Belle cut in, sharper. "You dragged strangers into this. You dragged the staff into it. A lawyer? Really?" Mom's eyes flicked to me. "You don't do this to family," she said, calm as a judge delivering a death sentence. Molly's lower lip trembled. She looked like she was about to apologize for being born. I stepped forward and put my body between them and my child. a physical wall. Stop, I said. Mom blinked, offended. We're talking. No, I said. You're cornering her. Belle scoffed. Oh, please, she's our niece. I grabbed Molly's hand. Her fingers were ice cold. She's my daughter, and you don't get access to her anymore. Not like this. Not ever. Mom's voice dropped, desperation creeping in. Tessa, you have to take it back. You have to stop the claim. Why? I asked. Mom swallowed. We put the house up as collateral, she whispered, for the restaurant. If the business gets audited, if we get fined, we lose the house. We lose everything. The room went still. The other parents in the lobby were pretending not to look, but they were listening. Molly stared at her grandmother, horror dawning on her face. She was being handed the weight of their financial ruin. I squeezed Molly's hand hard. You chose that, I said to my mother. She didn't. Mom's face hardened into stone. So you'll just let us lose everything? I looked at her. Really looked at her. You didn't pay people, I said. You didn't pay my child. You mocked her. That's what you chose. Belle opened her mouth, but shut it. If there is no clean argument against pay people for their work. I turned to Molly. Come on, I said, and we walked out. 6 months later, we were still no contact. Mom, Dad, Belle, all of them. No calls, no holidays. The silence was heavy at first, but then it became peaceful. The wage complaint didn't resolve in a day. It moved the way real consequences move. Slow, official, unavoidable. We went to a hearing. Mom showed up looking furious. She left looking smaller. A few weeks later, the decision came. They owed Molly her wages, plus penalties. When the payment finally hit Molly's account, she stared at the notification on her phone like it was a magic trick. Is that mine? She whispered. Every cent, I said. She didn't cheer. She just exhaled. Then she smiled, a small, satisfied smile, and moved the money into her trip fund. And it was the most normal thing in the world, to be paid for your work. After that, things unraveled for them. The story spread in our town. People don't like employers who stiff workers. Staff quit. Customers vanished. About a year after it all started, I heard through a distant cousin that my parents had sold their house. They downsized to an apartment. The restaurant closed quietly on a Tuesday. Belle moved. Molly asked me once, sitting on that same beige couch, "Did we go too far?" I looked at her. "We told the truth," I said. "They chose the rest." Life got quieter, but it got lighter, and I learned something my younger self never would have believed. Cutting them off didn't break our family. It finally protected it. So, tell me, did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments and subscribe for more.